We know the quality of your decisions determine the quality of your life. The problem is most of us are not great decision makers. So as we launch into a new year, my goal is to help set you up for the best year of leadership impact ever. To do so, we'll devote the next 2 teachings to the art of strategic decision making. As we start a brand new year, if you could work on one thing to help you grow in your leadership, there is a skill that I'd suggest you put high on your list. I'm calling it the art of strategic decision making. Why do your decisions matter so much? Because the quality of your decisions determines the quality of your life. The problem is that many of us are not great decision makers, right? What do? Well, we eat more than we should. We decide to buy things we can't afford. We waste time. We procrastinate. We say things we regret. We end up making permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. Because this is such an important subject, we're going to devote 2 episodes to help you develop your decision-making muscles. And on a side note, I wrote an entire book on this subject called Think Ahead, 7 decisions you can make today for the life you want tomorrow. What are we going to do? We're going to cover the 8 factors of great decision makers. It will take us 2 episodes to cover all 8. Let's start with the first one. The first of the 8 factors of great decision makers. Number 1, I would suggest to develop your decision-making muscles. Number 1, avoid either or scenarios as often as possible. As often as you can, when someone comes in and says, hey boss, should we do this or that? And they give you 2 options. As often as possible, expand the options. Avoid either or scenarios, because the truth is there are rarely ever only 2 options. And the challenge is whenever you're boxed in, you often miss multiple other or better ideas. For example, someone comes in and says, hey, should we add a new staff member or not? Should we fire this underperforming leader or not? Should we start a new church campus or not? Well, they give you 2 options, and I would say avoid either or options as often as possible. Expand your options. For example, if they say, should we add a new staff member or not? You can ask them additional questions. For example, like, well, what if we, instead of an either or, what if we maximized another 2 team members that are currently on the team who have margin to add more value? Or if you're in a nonprofit, you might say, well, what if we utilize more volunteers? Or you might say, okay, hey, instead of adding 1 staff member or not, what if we added 2 part-time roles? Or what if we outsourced this and used that strategy instead? If they say, should we fire this underperforming leader or not? Before you try to answer that question, I would ask, are you clear on why that leader is underperforming? For example, if you understand why they're underperforming, there might be a problem at home, and you could actually help that leader become better not only in the role, but better at home with providing counseling. Or maybe she's a leader that's under-resourced and doesn't have what she needs to be good at what she does. Or maybe he's a good player, but he's in the wrong role. If you move him to a different team, he might do even better. Don't get stuck in the either or. If you're in ministry, leading a church, and we say, should we add a new campus or not? Well, let's expand the options. We could say, well, maybe could we add another service where we are currently, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one? Or could we do another service in another part of the building before we add a whole new campus? Or could we beef up our online ministry impact? Or could we partner with another church and use their building on a Saturday night? Or we might say you're actually thinking too small. Why would you just add 1 campus? Maybe you'd need to add 3 and not 1. So what are we going to do? To really become better decision makers as often as possible, number 1, avoid either or scenarios. The second factor is this. Number 2, I would suggest that you decide when you're going to decide. Decide when you're going to decide. And here's what I know about most leaders, including me. We tend to put off whatever is not easy. If we have a difficult decision to make, we tend to procrastinate that. Some of you are so good at it. You've got the spiritual gift of procrastination, right? What do we know about procrastination? Well, procrastination is the number one enemy of progress. And we've all done this. We have a decision to make, and it's not easy, so we tend to put it off. And it's almost in our mind like we're pretending it's going to get easier to make later, or we're pretending it's going to go away. So what do? We wait. And we have to remember, please hear this, no decision is a decision. Let me say it again, because you got to believe this. No decision is a decision. I'll give you a different way to think about procrastinating just for fun. If you're going to procrastinate, because sometimes you will, I'm going to suggest that you procrastinate on purpose. What do I mean by this? This isn't passively delaying your decision. This is actively and intentionally holding your decision for what I would call a designated decision time. You're not just procrastinating because you don't want to get to it. You're actually procrastinating on purpose. And I'll explain. Chances are, as a leader, you probably have some form of a to-do list. Here's all the stuff that I have to do. I would suggest that you also create not just a to-do list, but also a to-decide list. Why do you want a to-decide list? Because most of us, what do? We keep the decisions that we need to make in our head. They're all up in our brain. And something happens when we record them on paper or on your phone or online. It frees your brain. Now your brain isn't subconsciously processing it and holding the decision. I've got to make it. It's keeping me awake at night. But you've put it down somewhere. It's recorded. And then, just as you have a scheduled time for so many different things, you might have a scheduled time for one-on-one meetings with your top leaders, or you've got a scheduled time to brainstorm, or you've got a scheduled time to make your sales calls. I would suggest that you schedule a decision-making meeting with yourself or with whoever you need to make the decision. So what do? Unless I have to make a decision in the moment, I save all of my decisions until Thursday. Why Thursday? The reason is because my top priority is preparing the message that I preach on the weekend, and I want my mind cleared of the weight of the message that I'm preparing early in the week, and I'll make my decisions as often as possible on the same day. Now, you know your rhythms, and they're going to be very different from mine. Maybe your mind is clearer early in the week or early in the day, so you might want to make your decisions early Monday morning. Others of you want to have certain tasks done, so you want to make your decisions later in the day or later in the week when your mind space is finally freed up. So for me, late in the week works best, and what happens is my assistant comes in with a bulk of decisions to make. Now, what does this do? By bulking the decisions together, so we have a decision-making time, what we do is I'll make one decision, and suddenly it seems to become easier to make the next decision. What are we doing? We're creating what I call decision momentum. When I make one decision, I feel two things immediately. What do you feel when you finally make a difficult decision? You feel both relief and you feel some form of confidence, like, I made one, and I made one, right? And so after making one, it seems like the next one comes a little bit easier. So not only will I designate or block off decision-making time, but occasionally what I'll do is I'll define what I call artificial deadlines. What would that be? It's a deadline, but it's not a real deadline. It's a self-imposed deadline. In other words, I may not need to make a decision for 2 weeks, but instead what I'm doing is I'm committing to make this decision by Thursday at 2 p.m. Now, why would I do this? Why would I decide early? I've heard some people teach this. They'll say, wait until the very last possible minute to decide. Wait until you absolutely have to decide. I would suggest that's not the wisest approach for many reasons. One of the big reasons is because the weight of unmade decisions slow your progress. Your mind just gets stuck and you feel the ongoing pressure. And what do we know about holding decisions and slow decision makers? We know this, that you will never see a fast-growing organization led by slow decision makers. Let me say it again. You will never, ever see a fast-growing, high-impact organization led by slow decision makers. Now, I am not telling you to be impulsive. I am telling you to be decisive. So here's a strategy. We're going to bulk decisions. When we do, that will hopefully create some decision momentum. Then we're going to keep decisions flowing so progress flows as well. And you may say, but Craig, I'm not sure about what decision to make. I'm just not quite 100% sure. And I would suggest to you that if you wait until you're 100% sure, you will likely be too late. So the 8 factors. Number 1, we're going to, as often as possible, avoid either or scenarios. Number 2, we're going to decide when to decide. Number 3, I'm going to suggest that you become your own personal advisor, that you become your own advisor. And I do this often. I'll be stuck on something and I simply can't make a decision. So what I'll do is I'll pretend that someone else is asking me advice about the very thing that I'm trying to decide. Why does this work? Why is it an effective strategy? Because looking at your situation from someone else's perspective, it separates your emotions from the situation. What happens? We become emotionally attached. We're too close to certain decisions because we care so much. And so let's say there's a team member that just hasn't been effective. And so this team member moved from one role, you moved into another, you moved into another. They've been in 3 different roles where you're trying to help them succeed and they're still not succeeding. And you can't decide, what do I do with this person? So I might say, well, if someone else asked me, what do I do with a team member that's been moved 3 times? I can't decide what to do. What would I tell them? I would tell them there's a common denominator, and that is that this team member isn't thriving anywhere. And so you have a problem with an underperforming team member that hasn't succeeded anywhere. And then I would tell them, you got to deal with the problem. And if you don't deal with the problem, then that team member is no longer the problem. You're now the problem. All of a sudden, there's clarity. I love this team member. I want them to succeed. I'm trying. I'm too emotionally attached. If I separate myself from the emotions and start to advise myself, it gives me clarity. It gives me more objectivity. So to advise yourself, there are 2 really, really good questions that you could ask. The first question you could ask is one Andy Stanley teaches, and that is this. You're going to ask yourself, what would a great leader do? In a situation like this, what would a great leader do? And this is a very effective question you can ask in your parenting or in your relationships or other decisions. What would a great mom do? Or what would a great husband do? Or what would a great follower of Jesus do? What would a great leader do? The second question is very effective as well, and that is this. What would my successor do? If someone else took over my role from the outside and they came in and faced this situation, what would my successor do? What do these questions do to help you move forward? They do 2 things. Number 1, they elevate your perspective. And number 2, they help compartmentalize your emotions. They're separating you from the emotions. They're elevating you above the situation, and they will help give you clarity to make your decision. So what are we going to do? Number 1, as often as possible, we avoid either or scenarios. Number 2, we're going to decide when to decide. Number 3, I'm going to suggest you become your own personal advisor. Now, we're going to group 4 and 5 together. Number 4, I suggest you delegate as many decisions as possible. And number 5, increase your tolerance for mistakes. Delegate as many decisions as possible and increase your tolerance for mistakes. Let's talk about the first one. Delegate as often as you can. And you might say, now wait a minute, isn't delegating decisions risky? And the answer is, absolutely it is. Yes, I'm not going to lie to you. In the short run, delegating important decisions to inexperienced decision makers is risky. But let me tell you what's way more risky. In the long run, it is way more risky not to delegate decisions today. Why? Because if you don't delegate decisions, you won't develop leaders. If you're the only one who can make most of the decisions, then here's a promise to you. your need to control will become your greatest limiting factor. Let me say these things again. If you don't delegate decisions, you will not develop leaders. And your need to control will become, and for some of you, this is where you are today. It is your greatest limiting factor. So if we're delegating decisions, if we're trusting other people to make very important decisions, that raises the question, how many decisions should the leader make? How many decisions should you make as a leader? And before I answer that question, I'd ask you a couple of questions. And I'd ask you, first of all, how big of an organization do you want to lead? And secondly, how big of a difference do you want to make? Because if you want to lead a big organization with great leaders, and you want to make a very real and significant big difference, then how many decisions do you want to make? And the answer is, you want to make as few of decisions as humanly possible. You say, okay, Craig, I'm with you. Walk me through this. How do I delegate a decision to someone who's an inexperienced decision maker? Let's go back to the previous idea. To delegate more decisions, we must increase our tolerance for mistakes. We talked about that. If we're going to delegate more decisions, we have to increase our tolerance for mistakes because people may make some wrong decisions. And you may say, like, why in the world would we have any tolerance for mistakes? Don't we want to avoid all mistakes? And the answer is actually, we really don't. Why? Because you know you can't grow anything if you don't take risks. And if you take risks, you also know that you won't always succeed, right? So we say this all the time. If you want to take risks, you must tolerate mistakes. It's not like we're looking to make mistakes, but we have to have a tolerance for mistakes. And here's what happens. You're the leader, and because you're the leader, you care. And because you care, you don't want to make a mistake. And so you feel the weight because you've got lots of decisions, you've got lots of pressure, and so you wait. You put off your decisions, you analyze, and you stall. This is actually a very significant problem. I would say this, many leaders overestimate the risk of making a bad decision and underestimate the cost of making no decision. Let me say this again. Please internalize this. Many leaders, they overestimate the risk of making a wrong choice, a bad decision, and they underestimate the cost of making no decision. So if you think you're the only one who can really make wise decisions, you're both overestimating yourself and you're underestimating the people around you. Honestly, you think you're more important than you really are. And you're undervaluing the valuable leaders around you. So we know this. Delegating decisions is actually one of the best tools to develop leaders. To be clear, and I want to just be very, very clear, delegating decisions is different than delegating tasks. What's the difference? When we delegate a task, you're giving someone an assignment. But when you're delegating a decision, you're giving someone authority. And again, what is the difference? Let's drive and drill in on this. Delegating tasks develops followers, but delegating authority develops leaders. And there's a massive difference. Again, Andy Stanley teaches on this subject, and he says, and I like this, he says, two of the most important words in your leadership vocabulary would be these two words. Are you ready? The words are this: you decide. You decide. As often as possible, someone walks into your office and says, hey boss, what should we do about this? As often as you can, one of your best leadership development tools is to say, you decide, you choose. What do you think? And you delegate the decision. What I've done is worked on this for years and years and years, and I've delegated more decisions than you could ever imagine, from small things to really big things. I mean, the smallest things like what I'm going to eat, to even someone help me with what I'm going to wear, to titles of messages someone else will help decide, to big things like where specifically we're going to put a new campus or what the building's going to look like, all the way down to hiring of the staff. I still care, but I trust our team to be involved. And to be clear, in the early years, I did everything. I did it all, everything. But as the organization grows, your goal is to do less and empower more. Do less and empower more. Why do you do less and empower more? Because your importance isn't a reflection of what happens in your presence, but what happens in your absence. Now you're going to say, okay, but what if it fails? What if it doesn't work? And the answer is sometimes it's going to fail, sometimes it's not going to work. And when it does, remember, we have a big tolerance for error because we have a big appetite for growth. Sometimes falling short is the price you pay for going big over time. Now, one more quick word, and you have to remember this. You're still the leader. The buck still stops with you. You have to remember, you can delegate authority, but you can't delegate responsibility. You can delegate authority to make the decision, but ultimately, you still have to oversee and take responsibility for whatever happens underneath your leadership. So even though you're trusting someone else to decide, you still want to do everything possible to help them succeed. Why? Because the potential of your organization is a reflection of the quality of its leaders. Now, before we wrap up, I've got really good news for you. There is so much to learn on this subject that I've recorded an exclusive bonus episode called Discovering Your Decision-Making Style. This is free only for those of you in our leadership community, and I want to tell you about the content. Based on my research, there are 5 specific and different styles of decision-making. Most of you, you'll have a dominant style and you'll have a secondary decision-making style. What are the 5 styles? I'll give them to you briefly. There is the lone wolf, the researcher, the includer, the consensus builder, and the intuitive. What I want to do is I want to help you discover your decision-making style. I want to help you understand the strength of your style, and I want to help you understand and manage the weaknesses of your style. Then I'm going to help you create a very specific plan to grow the art of your strategic decision-making. How do you get this episode? If you're currently receiving our emails and you already get the leader guide, then you'll automatically receive this exclusive bonus episode. If you don't, here's all you do. Go to Life.Church/decision style, Life.Church/decision style, all one word, and you'll get the free bonus to learn about your decision-making style. So you'll be ready for part 2 teaching as we move forward. I'll say again, on the first Thursday of next month, we'll release part 2 of the 8 factors of great decision makers. If this content is helpful, please invite others to be a part of our leadership community. Share on social media. And hey, there's a new year, new opportunities to make a very big difference. So let's invest in your own leadership. Let's get better, more passionate, sharpen your own leadership tools, because everyone wins when the leader gets better.
Thank you.